The passage for today is from John 14, 1 to 12. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have not told you? I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? Jesus answered, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do not know him, you know him, and you have seen him. Philip said, Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. Jesus answered, Don't you know, Philip, even after I have been among you such a long time? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father, and that the Father is in me? The words I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing his work. Believe in me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. Or at least believe on the evidence of the works themselves. Very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father. This is the word of the Lord. So my religious fascination kind of began when I was a child. I was actually one of those oddly philosophical kids, and not much has changed. I blame my mother, actually. My parents were Sikhs, or are Sikhs, from North India, and ever since I was young, my mom held my hand and we went to the temple together. She took me to the Sikh history and culture classes. They're similar to Christian Sunday school classes, but by my standard, the food was better, and good. It had lots of spice. I think this school helped me become enchanted by our cultural narratives, the narratives that form our communities and inform our sense of self. And so very young, I had this childlike innocence where I deeply believed the stories that were told to me, and I held them close to my heart. Now, some of these stories were fantastic and gave me life, and some pushed me forward, but others were very tragic, causing my childlike self much despair. One day in class, I was told that in Sikhism, when you die, if you have not lived an adequately moral life, you go through 1 billion life forms. As in, you reincarnate as a fly, and then as a mosquito, and then as a cow, a bull, a dog, so on and so forth, till you can finally become a human being again and get a chance to redeem yourself. You get a second chance at a moral life. Well, I was a child. I was a little mischievous. I knew how displeasing my life was to many adults, and this freaked me out. A little later, my mom asked me to say my prayers before bed. I said, nope, God's stupid. And immediately my heart clenched. I was a blasphemer. At that point, I knew my end was near. Well, actually really far. I still had 1 billion life forms to go. And so I would sit there and imagine the quickest way to die as a mosquito, and then a dove, and a tiger, to hopefully quicken my step to being a human again. This story is both simultaneously really hilarious and sad. The narratives we are told are deeply formative, and ones that invoke fear even more so, particularly when we are vulnerable. And this idea of pleasing the divine runs through every theistic tradition. In high school, I started hanging out with a bunch of evangelicals. They too, like me, had strict parents. They were not allowed to have sex, drink alcohol, or drugs, so it was a match made in heaven. I had found my people, and in some ways, I had stayed with them ever since. They told me another narrative about God. They told me about a God of grace who loved me and was willing to forgive all my sins if I just asked. God already knew I was a sinner. In fact, we're all sinners and therefore deserve death and God's wrath. Thankfully, this God, angry God, is forgiving and merciful, and instead of eliminating humanity, he targeted his anger towards Jesus, who dies under its weight. In this way, Jesus dies in my place so that I can live. Because Jesus takes the weight of my sin, I am made clean and righteous and live forever with God himself. I am assuming you are all more familiar with this narrative. And this, I was told, was the good news. And I believed in this God, and I became a Christian in my teens. I guess I desperately needed to believe in a God who was love, but this evangelical God had a love I could recognize. He also seemed to desperately hate me and my sin in ways that I hated myself and my sin. The resentment was familiar. But no matter how hard I tried, I could not believe this gospel was good news. It just seemed more convenient than a billion life forms. This narrative began to break me, as I see it break so many Christians. Even though I was not the one to go through God's violence, it was Jesus. My insides could not trust a God who craved such violence anyways. How could I kiss the feet of a being who found me so repulsive that he needed someone's death to tolerate me? But wait, wasn't that an act of love? This God needed this violence because he loved me, right? He killed Jesus so he wouldn't have to kill me? This conflict added great grief. I needed to be a pleasing and truly believing person lest God exercise his judgment over me, because I couldn't be sure he wouldn't. It seemed that violence was in his character. My grief was also compounded. I had managed to save myself from this loving but violent God, but what about my family? They could never embrace Christianity because of their cultural and sick commitments. Were they under divine attack? What did God's love look like to people outside of the Christian worshiping circle? Was it still violent? The religious narratives that undergird our communities are powerful, aren't they? They grab hold of our imaginations and help us paint our sense of self, community, and God. They shape our conscience with images of right and wrong and inspire our understanding of a good life. These narratives are very meaningful and life-giving. However, problems arise when our cultural imaginations are too narrow and we cannot imagine a good life being obtained apart from administering fear and criticism from the authorities above us. Be good lest you go through a billion life forms. Follow Jesus unless you go to hell. And religious institutions are not the sole culprits of this type of manipulation. In the marketplace of ideas, we are bombarded constantly with competing voices vying for our attention. Some of these voices may even be telling us the truth about life or even be good advice. But in a world of a limited imagination, they can become nagging and taunting voices. Go to college unless you want to be unemployed. Exercise unless you want to be unhealthy. Don't cry unless you want to be weak. Vote this way if you want to be moral. Think this way if you want to be right. Buy these clothes to be cool. Say these words to be taken seriously. Sit down, stand up, get a haircut, and for God's sake, stop acting like a fool. Do you see the problem? When we are human beings, we are inclined to manipulate our narratives. We can tell, if we're not careful, our listeners, that unless you do X or Y, your reputation or value will suffer. When this happens in religious institutions, it is very crippling. It's dangerous because our narratives are attributed to God himself. And then God becomes a nagging, unpleasable, tyrannical figure. God's power and fear can be used to cripple us into obedience, but such coercion makes worship very difficult, if not impossible. But when I read the Gospels, I somehow see a different vision. It took me a long time to see this, but I think I've got a little inkling here. It seems that he's aware of our limited perspectives and is continuously trying to stretch our imaginations. While our minds are preoccupied with creating narratives designed to understand who's in and who's out, it seems that God is not concerned about who is good and who is bad. Christ himself stretches this circle in rather ambiguous ways, so that no one may find themselves outside of God's realm of grace, and at the same time, no one's surely confident of their undying righteousness. Take for me for a minute to think of the woman caught in adultery. This woman would traditionally be stoned for infidelity, for sleeping with a man who was not her husband. When the crowd gathers and demands her blood, Christ asks for the one without sin to cast the first stone. He questions our preconceived notions of who is truly righteous and who is in need of condemnation, and then frees her with grace. He invites her to new life. We also read that he spends a lot of time with outcasts of society. Meddling and having dinner with tax collectors, he allows female followers and extends kindness to prostitutes. He gives healing towards the physically disabled. He made friends with the poor. And if all that is not enough, he tells stories where the Samaritans are redeeming characters and not an ethnic group meant to be despised. Would God hang out with people with such questionable reputations or individuals with such limited social capital? Jesus did. Again, stretching the idea of who's in and who is out. It seems to me that many of us follow our social narratives because we fear that we will be named unrighteous or become people who are not valued by our society. But our religious narratives do not teach to follow that path. Christ suggests that it's precisely in this frame of reference that God can be found. This God is not concerned about exercising his power and dominance, but laying it down, being one with the people and making his presence known to all. That being said, this message wasn't exactly popular. The religious elite of his time are not impressed by Christ's radical inclusion. They call for his arrest and later his execution. It seems that Jesus is aware of his impending death, and so he gathers with his friends. Theoretically, this is Christ's time to establish his identity as king. He can assert his dominance, smite the Pharisees who criticized his leadership, silence anyone who questioned the legitimacy of his ways, and show what a powerful God he is, a powerful king he is. And surely such an expectation was of the Messiah. But Jesus doesn't do this. He doesn't. Instead, he sits with his friends and tells them, "Do not let your heart be troubled. In my house, in my Father's house, there are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. But I go to prepare a place for you, so that where I am, you may be also. You know the way to the place where I am going." In this moment, Thomas asks, "But Lord, where are you going?" If we don't know where you're going, how can we know the way? Thomas, I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. "But show me the Father, Lord." Philip, have you been with me so long that you don't know when you see me, you've seen the Father? I and my Father are one. Whoever believes in me, greater things than these shall he do. Aha! There it is. The story of triumph we have been waiting for. Jesus is the way, the truth, the life. This is the sign of his exclusive power. Isn't how this is usually preached? But friends, these are the words of a man waiting his execution. These are the words of a dying man. We are told that he is submitting to his murderers. And so who are these murderers? They are religious leaders who want to centralize the religious and social authority to themselves. Political leaders affiliated with Caesar, individuals whose power is predicated on the bondage of others. They can't sympathize with Christ's mission, one that empowers disenfranchised and forgotten, the least of these. That would be the end of their own social power. And it is to these people that Christ is submitting. And in this submission, we hear his words, "I and my Father are one. When you see me, you see the Father. But Jesus, where are you going? And we know how the next chapter of this narrative goes. Christ is going to the cross. I am the truth. I am the way. I am the life. I am paving the way to the cross. I am laying my power down so that people, when you see me, you will see the Father. That he is not angry. He is not looking to spite you. He is not looking to throw you out. That his circle is wide enough. I'm trying to show you that he does come off the throne and that he cares and tends for his loved ones, that he nurtures his creation. He loves those who are forgotten, those who are right, those who are wrong, those who are in, those who are out, because that is the type of God he is. He loves you more than he loves power. He loves you as his own. And even when you rebel, even when your hearts are so murderous that you would kill God himself, I will absorb your wrath. I will not retaliate. That is where I am going. But while I am gone, I am also going to prepare a place for you. And that place is in my Father's house. And let me tell you, in my Father's house, there are many rooms. There is a lot of space there. There is room for you, Philip. There's room for you, Peter. There's room for you, Thomas and Mary. There's room for prostitutes, for the tax collectors, for the Samaritans, for the blasphemers, for the hurting, for the downcast, for the forgotten. There's room for the poor and the rich, the Democrat, the Republican, the American, the Colombian, the Indian. There's room for sexual minorities. There's room for those who consider themselves majorities and may not know it. The lost, the wandering, those who get it wrong and those who get it right. The poor, the rich, confused. There is room. And if it were not so, I would have told you. But there is room. My friends, this is not a narrative of triumph where the winners write history. This is God of heaven reaching low to stand alongside a creation he loves. A creation who has listened so long that they are on the outsides, that they may not be loved in so many forms, in the narratives in so many ways that we hear. And he says, I'm telling you that there is room. And so you and I, we hold a lot of narratives about God. Some of us may not even know where these narratives come from. Some of them are positive, and some of them are colored by fear of God's power and might in ways that are incredibly unhelpful and damaging. In ways that seem like the divine is after you, just waiting to get you. But if there's any good news that you take away today, it is that Christ died so that we may know that God is not our enemy, but a loving father and mother waiting to call us home. In a home with many rooms, with a lot of space, so that we can commune together. Because if it were not so, he would have told us. Amen. Please pray with me as we close. Father, thank you that you love us with such undying and relentless love. Thank you that no matter what narratives we bring to you, stories of peace or unrest, stories of celebration or frustration, stories of happiness or sadness, that you listen intently, because you are the Father who loves and cares. Lord, be with us as we finish off the end of the semester. Be with us as we try to find our own calls in the world above us, as we try to figure out what is happening for our summers, for post-graduation, and for next year. But no matter where we go and what plans we make, may we know that you delight in us and that you guide us every step of the way. Help us see that good news wherever we go. In your name, amen. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.